We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise.
So, another week, another episode.
I know. I'm really I was a little bit surprised by Tina's story. When we were interviewing Tina, and so this is the final episode of this season, and we were, going through the process of putting this together. You initially had contact with Tina, and I only read the title of her book, and I didn't get it immediately. And then we started to dig into it. So we're not going to give too much away, but needless to say, it focuses on child protection services. Do you know anybody that has been in care or whose family have been involved with child protection services over the years?
This is going to make me sound so spoiled, but no.
I don't think it's a spoiled thing, is it? It's just, honestly, I personally wouldn't say I know somebody. I know of someone who their involvement or CPS's involvement in their family just kind of became, again, I feel like things like this get gossiped about.
Yeah, so I was going to say, growing up in Hong Kong, as you can imagine, this is such a unspoken topic, right? Even if somebody was from the system, I don't think they would have said at school. We kind of, I'm not going to name names, obviously, but there was always like a running rumor that one of our classmates was adopted. And it's kind of, I think it goes to show really what little we know about it or how society viewed these things, because it wasn't discussed openly and we were children, so we wouldn't have asked our classmate, like, hey, are you adopted? Even though it's not really a big deal. Now, saying it as an adult, of course, myself not being adopted or not having adopted anyone, I'm in no place to judge or kind of express any feelings about it, right? I wouldn't know how that feels like.
So I was just going to distinguish between people who have been in foster care versus adoption. I knew people that had been adopted, but that was a case of their parents, for whatever reason, chose to adopt a child. Not, I'm in child protection services and I have to...
Like, I was taken from my parents,
exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think there is, again, a subtle difference and a case of one is desired, if we can say that, and one is undesired, because everybody would, I think, agree that if the situation is safe, you would always want a child with its parents or with somebody that can take care of them. And if it's not safe, then there are other measures, right? We live in countries, and I say it's growing from the UK. I don't know how it is in Hong Kong, but certainly the system is supposed to be there to protect children who are vulnerable.
Yeah, all I know about it, right, is what I've seen on screens. I'm not going to lie. And the overall impression I get of the system, in quotation marks, is that it's a scary place to be. It tends to be where kids are forgotten. And sometimes I think it's easy for us to think about when we say children, we think like 3, 4, 5-year-olds. But up until you're 17, you're a child. And in popular culture, it's always been depicted to be a very, very trying experience, especially once you reach adolescence, because we've all been an adolescent. It's tough, regardless of your situation at home. And I can only imagine how hard it is to kind of go through, that the first time you have existential questions about yourself and your identity and trying new things, new feelings, experiences, and not having your actual family with you. I can only imagine how hard that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about, we always think of children in the system as like babies, toddlers. Did you ever watch Tracy Beaker, or were you too old? Oh, you did? Yeah. Again, that was my knowledge.
I'm not that much older than you.
No, but I just meant, I didn't know if it was still on screen, or you would even want to watch it when you were here, or if it was in Hong Kong as well.
Were there not also books?
There were, by Jacqueline Wilson.
I think I read a lot of Jacqueline Wilson before I watched the TV show.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You need people to represent people of all walks of life in literature, in pop culture, in art, on TV, because otherwise these things are not in our consciousness. So I think those books did a lot to bring awareness.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, we'll listen to Tina's story to find out more details about her specific case, but I think there's also, I guess, a fairly I'll start again. There's also a very unfair preconception that everybody who's come out through the system is damaged goods. You know, it's a bad kid.
Super unfair. And
because there are loads of good foster parents, you know, there are good CPS people. They're just never depicted because it's not juicy.
Right, because they don't make the headlines.
Yeah. I mean, we've all heard in the UK here, we've all heard Baby P, you know, the absolute tragedy of what happened, and all we hear are bad things. And I would hazard a guess that it's more unpleasant than pleasant in most cases, but I think, I just think it's because of the bad press this whole topic gets. People don't talk about it. People don't want to get involved in it.
I agree. Shall we listen to Tina's story?
Yeah.
I guess I'll start off with graduating from a university. I was born and raised in Eastern Canada, but when I graduated, I moved west and I lived in the beautiful mountain town of Banff, Alberta. I lived there for about 30 years. Never thought I'd stay there, or certainly stay out west as long as I did. And in that town, I became I got married, and then I became a mom, got divorced, still had the kid. And then she grew up, as children tend to do, and then had a baby of her own. She moved to a neighboring province of British Columbia. But that's where my story starts, is becoming a grandmother. This was back in 2017, and my book starts off, and the story starts off with me driving through a winter blizzard in March of 2017 to get to her, because the situation was really confusing. I was getting different sort of reports and phone calls from our friend and what was going on there. And that's kind of the beginning of the story, is just me driving through this blizzard to get to my family in the neighboring province of British Columbia. We think that someone had called CPS in BC. So CPS in BC, Child Protective Services in BC, it's called MCFD. So that acronym stands for Ministry of Child and Family Development. We think someone called in January of 2017 to say that my daughter was a meth head. And it just simply wasn't true. So the social workers who started to get involved at that point, they coerced a signature out of my daughter to be able to go into her medical records for her pregnancy. And we suspect that they got a hold of the pH urine strip samples, which is fairly routine, that doctors test the pH towards the end of the pregnancy. And they found there was no evidence of any meth use. Now, I'm speculating here because as you get more into our story, and when you read the book, at the very end of the book, there are still questions, and there was still a tremendous sense of confusion. So I can only speculate, because we never really did find out 100% what their motives were to do what they did, but they went ahead and did it anyway. So they get the urine test, it's clean. After the baby was born, they took a sample of the umbilical cord and tested that, and that came back clean. Plus the fact my daughter is telling them that I'm not a meth head. Like, I've never touched this stuff, I never will. But that didn't seem to be good enough. So when I'm driving through this blizzard to get to my family, there were all these thoughts and all this confusion swirling through my head. And then I get there and finally meet the social workers, and they tell me that they're sending out the placenta to be tested. And I think that the only reason why they did that was to plant seeds of doubt in me, so that I would start fighting with my daughter over, like, why are they doing this? Like, what have you done, kind of thing. And yeah, so and again, like I mentioned in the book, and I actually had a lawyer do a report on this about how the placenta test, we never did find out what the results were, but we knew that we knew they'd come back clean like the other tests, because they were looking for something that just wasn't there. So it was really confusing. It was extremely frustrating, and this was all being done over a baby. Like, this isn't some fight over an object or whatever. This is a child that we're talking about, and the future of the child. It was very bureaucratic. There was a lot of paperwork involved. So I got thrown into a situation where I almost felt I needed to be a lawyer to really understand all the jargon and all the paperwork they were throwing at us. And, to be a lawyer, to be the best advocate for my daughter. But they were just, I don't know. It's just so complex. And I do go through the timeline a little bit better in my book. But when that moment, when they took the baby, I mean, it's incredibly shattering. For example, I used my phone to record that 2 hours of how they just seemed to perpetuate confusion and tried to get my daughter and I think, to turn on each other and start fighting in front of them. And then they announced that they were actually taking the baby, and then they took the baby. So that 2-hour recording, to this day, I have never been able to listen to it. I just cannot listen to it. It was just so shattering. And so every single day from that point, that was March 10th, 2017, was us just little by little by little putting back the pieces of our lives and remaining 100% focused on getting the baby back to her mother, where she belonged, and then maintaining my right to be the grandmother and as a support person for my daughter. And then later on, my husband came on board, because he wasn't there when they took the baby, but he definitely came on board afterwards, because he fell hopelessly in love with the child. So the bullet points are: they took the baby March 10th. Then we had a presentation hearing with courts, and we got a lawyer who happened to be a good lawyer, which was good. And then, appearing in court every chance we got, visiting the baby every chance we got. And then they had no choice but to physically give the baby back after 27 days. So that was good. I mean, we did get her back physically after 27 days, which is a really short time as far as a lot of these cases go. But legally, they still had custody of the baby on paperwork. So they just kept trying to drag it out month after month after month in court. And then finally, we went back to BC to face them in court when the baby was 7 months old. And it was just pure dumb luck that we got a judge who had some common sense, and he finally had the power to end it and to get them to back off. So yeah, that's kind of long story short, but I definitely go into a lot more detail of our feelings of frustration and joy too, and some laughter too. There's some laughs in there because my daughter and I, we had to if we didn't maintain a sense of humor, we'd, if we didn't laugh, we'd be crying all the time, which we did. We, for the most part, we had the baby with us, so that was a major part of our healing and our journey to get the outcome that we did. But I mean, I got a look into a system that it really needs to be audited, and it needs to be dismantled and probably rebuilt. Like I don't know what the solutions are, but there's definitely a problem. Okay. And yeah, I guess maybe the start of any solution is you've got to acknowledge the fact that this is a problem, it's not working, and it's definitely not in the best interest of the child. My impression of CPS has done a complete 180. Prior to 2017, I always thought they were there to help families, particularly poor families, who may not have the education or the parenting skills or whatever, to benefit the child. I don't feel that way anymore. I think that they actually target poor people, and that if you're poor and you didn't have a great background, maybe you did grow up in foster care yourself, that there just seems to be some kind of pseudo red flag that labels you and puts you in this high risk category that you're not even aware of. But that wasn't our situation. Plus, and your listeners might not like to hear this at all, getting caught in the system is just a matter of being one phone call away. Like, I don't think people realize how easy it is to get snared into this system, because somebody can make a call about you and they can even invent it, and by law these social workers have to investigate it. Now, what they do in that period of time, I definitely have more questions than answers. I felt in my daughter's case, all they did in that time was not objectively research, if the complaint was actually true. I think they used that time to just ascertain how poor my daughter was, if she had any support, how exploitable she was, and that's not a service in the best interest of the child. I'm sorry, that's just wrong on so many different levels, starting with human rights levels. Every case is just so different. I think in our case, because we were able to shut them down fairly quickly, I think it helped beyond words. That helped us so much in getting the outcome that we did. For parents who have been dealing with the system first, it starts off as they blindside you. And it starts off with maybe they take your kid for temporary foster care custody for a week. That turns into a month. That turns into new court orders for 3 or 6 months that turn into years. And then that drags on. I don't have any advice really for people to how to remain positive when something like this is dragging on for years. Because years later, children grow up. So just try from the very beginning to nip it in the bud right away, assert your rights, get a lawyer as soon as you can, and stop talking. Because I found out the hard way that the social workers would take my words and then twist them around to suit their narrative. And when I would use these words, that wasn't the intent that I had using those words. It was actually something else. But they just took those words literally and then would twist them their own way to suit their narrative, which was painting the mother out to be this horrible person who was going to be a danger to their child, and basically dismissing all rights or even legal custody claims, which I have as the grandmother of the child. So yeah, I do get asked that question a lot, and it's so hard to answer. But yeah, I think assert your rights, get a lawyer as soon as possible, try to be quiet and let the lawyer do the talking for you. Stay calm too. I think that's another one too. When social workers come with the element of surprise, they come knocking on your door and they really exploit the fact that like parents are just so freaked out when a social worker is showing up on their door with a complaint, because I think parents automatically go to, oh, well, who complained about me, rather than just keep calm and just, okay, what's this about? You know, what, and like, can I see something tangible? Can I see the paperwork? What's this complaint about? Oh, okay. Oh, you don't want to tell me? Okay, well, let me talk to a lawyer. Okay, just wait there a moment, you know, kind of thing. And yeah. Anyway, yeah, there's lots of advice I could give, but it really would depend on the situation. Yeah. Yes, I would tell my granddaughter when she's old enough. In fact, I have a little box that I keep for her, and I will give it to her on her 18th birthday. And if she hasn't read the book already, I definitely will make sure that she has a copy of the book for her to read, what we went through when she was born and how much her mom loves her and how much we fought to get her back. What gives me hope for the future right now, and I do touch on this a little bit in my book towards the conclusion, is actually what's going on right now in Canada with this Freedom Convoy. I think that at the end of my book, I just kind of sum up the incredible frustration I had over this system, and I start to draw parallels between that and the frustration that we've gone through these past couple of years with COVID. And so I think if readers follow this journey with us and then come to the end, I think particularly people who are involved with this Freedom Convoy and understand the principles of it. It's about our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that they'll understand the feeling of frustration. I think that, you know, the government this was the last straw. Like, so yeah, that gives me hope. And I had a lot of faith in my fellow Canadians that the only reason why the system has been allowed to perpetuate as long as it has is because Canadians just don't know. And if they start to find out about something like this, I wouldn't be one bit surprised if Canada just rallied again and had another, you know, convoy for the kids kind of thing, because it's just so unacceptable right now what's happening in the foster care system and in the child protective services system across this country. I think I would rate my life out of 10. I think I would rate it at a 9. There's always a little area of improvement, and I don't think I'll share that with your audience. I think that's just my own sort of personal development. But yeah, I think I'm pretty happy as a grandma right now. I'm happy that I did the best job raising my daughter because she's such a good mom now. And yeah, I think that that 9 out of 10, that's pretty good. Yeah. You know, when I'm going to be 60 years old around the corner. So I guess if I meet my maker soon, I will have no regrets. So that's pretty good.
So Tina's story, I mean, wow. I think the bit that got me when we were recording, where she said, you are only one phone call away from being in the system. Like, that really hit home for me. Because as we were saying at the beginning, child protection services is not something that you and I knew about or was part of our childhood or even around the people around us. Mm-hmm. But it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, I think I remember when I was listening to Tina say that, I was thinking, thank God I don't have a child. Like, can you imagine I can't imagine anyone in my circle who would call CPS on me. But just the thought of that, that threat is so real and so out of your control.
That's the point. It doesn't have to be someone in your circle. It literally, it can be anyone. And whilst I think all of these things are absolutely necessary, right?
Yeah.
And there's great work that is done by agencies worldwide for children that are incredibly vulnerable. You also get all of those stories. You also get ones like Tina's and her daughters, where in their case, and the thing that was baffling to me was when she was describing the confusion of just not understanding what the concern was and never really getting a clear answer, like as to why that baby.
And it sounded like they have no evidence, actually. Right? And I mean, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, right? But in this case, we'll let the listeners read Tina's book, to read all the details of what happened. But it did sound to me that wrong place, wrong time. I don't know. It was just a combination of everything that could go wrong for them.
I also got the sense that she recognized that they were fortunate, right? She said they got a good lawyer. She had someone that advised her very well. And their ordeal ended, not to diminish it, but it ended in a relatively short period of time compared to how long it may have potentially dragged on for.
Yeah.
So she was able, and her daughter and her family were able to heal from that with their granddaughter going forward. But for people who, to live in the uncertainty, I think, not knowing how long this could go on for, that's just got to be so demoralizing.
Yeah, and I think, in this case, Tina is speaking as the grandmother, right? But there are also plenty of single parents out there who don't have the support of their parents, or maybe don't have extended family to support them. And it just, listening to Tina just makes me think you need more resources than reasonable, actually, to win something like this. Because basically what's happening is that the law isn't on your side.
Tina said something interesting, and I wanted to get your view on it, was the system targets people that are poor unfairly. And I have to say, listening to what you just said about resource and access to resource, if you don't have it, you are at such a disadvantage in this. Not just, you're a disadvantage in many aspects of life, but in this, I think it's so incredibly hard to prove that you can be a good parent versus actually, being the assumption being that you're a good parent.
I think this is one of those things, right? In terms of financial resources, I think it's easiest for people to relate to. I saw this meme today that buying a house today is like telling the bank, it's like the bank asking you to prove that you can pay, I don't know, let's say £500 per month. And you telling the bank, but I can't because I'm paying my landlord £1,000 a month. And then the bank saying, but so you can't prove that you can pay $500 a month then. It's that whole cycle of almost not just setting you up to fail, but keeping you in failure, because so much of what we do is tied to economic interest and gains. So, of course, there are plenty of examples of people who came from poverty, got themselves out of poverty. But we need to remember that, number one, these could be 1 in a million. And number two, let's not glorify the whole situation. Let's not just applaud those who got out of poverty and forget about those who couldn't or won't ever. And I agree with what you said in terms of having these mechanisms is needed. There are children in genuine danger who need to be rescued or helped, just like how in most courts in the world, you know, you can appeal things, right? And I know a lot of the times, if you happen to be the family of the victim, or you are the victim, you would feel like, no, everything should be on my side. But this is almost like, I guess, the beauty of humans, right? Like, nothing's perfect either way. And so it really comes down to the intention of the people holding the power. And I mean, I didn't mean to turn this into a really like deep conversation, but I think a lot of the times when people find themselves in positions of authority or power, it costs you nothing, right? To just really think about what you're doing. Who are you actually serving? In this case, it should be the children. And the why of what you're doing something. I think not enough people think about that. It's very easy for us to fall into this pattern of just being on autopilot, just doing a job, right? And famously, people used to say, well, I'm sure soldiers during Nazi Germany just say they were doing their job, right? But it takes just one person. I don't know if you've seen that really famous photograph of all of these German soldiers hailing Hitler, but one person didn't.
Yes.
Right. And it's such a powerful thing. And of course, you know, I'm not trying to draw parallels between anything and Nazism with anything else. You know, it's never going to be a fair comparison. But I think it's just a good reminder for people, however little your power or authority you think you have, I think everybody will find themselves in relative power at some point in life. So just, what was that thing in Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility. I mean, it's true, right? Even though I'm quoting Spider-Man, I think it's a good reminder for people just to really think about what are you doing, you know, and who are you impacting, and I don't know, use some discretion, especially when it's about people.
And that's the crux of this particular story, is we are talking about children who sometimes in an age where they cannot advocate for themselves. And it is, I mean, I don't envy anyone either that works within the system for the protection of children, or people that are parents and caregivers that are on the other end, or even people that are foster parents that, you know, through these circumstances, these children come into their lives temporarily.
I mean, imagine how good foster parents must feel, being always cast in a bad light.
Yes, I think it's kind of like, not to sort of equate it, but that sort of evil stepmother vibe that you get in a fairy tale or a childhood book. I agree, but also imagine the heartache. I could think of foster parents who are incredible at what they do, but, you know, eventually they bond with these children and they're taken from them as well. It's the other side of the story that, you know, we don't often talk about all that much. I also thought how lucky Tina's granddaughter is. Like, she's gonna grow up knowing like what her mother and her grandmother did for her. Like, that's got to feel incredible when she gets older. Yeah,
and I think, you know, I'm really happy to hear Tina say that, of course I'm going to tell her, because it's exactly these almost generational trauma, right? Like, you've got to talk about them, because I'm pretty sure even though the granddaughter was a baby when this happened, babies take in everything, you know? Like, I'm sure there is some psychological impact even at that age. And what I was really almost surprised or impressed with is the few times we've talked to Tina before recording with her, you would not be able to tell that she went through all of this. Like, she's got such an upbeat, happy personality that she could have been talking about, I don't know, her favorite meal. You know, she was so positive about the whole thing. And I think that probably, you know, added a lot to their success in, you know, resolving this issue. I can imagine her kind of being that positive spirit cheerleader in the background, keeping everyone happy and positive. So, yeah.
So thank you for listening to this season. You can find all of the information in the show notes. If you do look for Tina's book, please Google her name and her book together. We'll leave you to find out what happens if you Google just the book. But please do Google them together. So it's Tina Fumo and A Fancy Prison.
Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website culturallyspeaking.co.uk for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.